Alrighty, so welcome everyone to the Roman Villa Shawl KAL Part 2 Zoom. I'm really excited to be back with everybody and see what you're doing and check in on your progress and give you some more tips and tricks along the way. So reminding everyone that we do not expect you to finish this particular shawl during the course of the KAL, but these sessions are to help you with various different parts of it in case you're doing something that you haven't run into before. So just a little bit of housekeeping to begin with. What we'll do is we'll start off with everybody's mics muted, but this particular session, we're going to have a little bit more time for show and tell and questions and things like that, because I only have to show you 2 things this time, which is really great. So we will give you plenty of chances to show your progress off, to ask questions, and just visit a little bit with everybody who is participating here on the Zoom and in the KAL. So we are, as I mentioned, for anybody who is just joining, recording the session. And if you don't want to be accidentally on camera, then feel free to just turn your camera off. I will admit that it is nice to see the gallery view with everybody because it's like being in a room with you all and I get to see everybody's smiling faces, which is quite lovely. We do have some exciting prizes for you tonight, so I'm really glad that you could all join us because we will be drawing for 4 delightful items. We're going to do 2 Orenburg Rhapsody shawl kits tonight, and we're going to have 2 Notions packs featuring some really nifty new scissors that we got, which we're really excited about because they are beautiful and they are folding. And of course, I am doing it wrong because, you know, but anyway, we have rose gold and then we have beautiful rainbow scissors. So we're going to be giving away a Notions pack that includes these scissors and a bunch of other little goodies. So you will have 4 chances to win. We will be doing the draw from the people who are actually in the session. So you'll want to stick around for those. And we'll be doing them periodically so that everybody has a chance to be a winner for some lovely little goodies. So just want to do a little bit of review here because there are some people who didn't join us last time. With regards to this shawl, there are some interesting things that I just want to point out that are important to do when you are knitting it. And one of them is to pay attention to the notes at the start of the shawl. And it's worth reviewing them later on too, because I've put a lot of details in here about the various different parts of the construction. And then there's some bits and pieces that will help you along the way. So there's it starts off on page 2 with an overview of the shawl and how it's constructed. So what direction things go in and basically what you'll be doing in order to get your shawl finished. And then we go into a few things like there are some ease stitches added, and why we slip the edges. So for those who weren't here the last time, I just want to remind you that the edges on this shawl are slipped on both sides. And the reason for that is that this provides some structure. It allows the knitting to continue to be a bit elastic, but it's going to keep your shawl from sagging once you're wearing it and stretching it out and tying it around your neck. And, you know, in my case, Lily steals it and drags it off into a corner to nest on and so on. So you do want to do those slip stitch edges because they are important to the overall drape of the shawl and they will help it to keep its structure. So as you're proceeding on with your various different sections of the shawl, every single section will always slip the stitch. Each one, whether it's mosaic or your tesserae little blocks or whatever, you're always going to slip on both edges. So you just don't have to worry about it. Every row begins that way. Gauge is relatively important with this shawl in terms of one color you have the potential to run out of. And if that happens, we do have a suggestion in the pattern for what you can do to substitute. But the color in the original that you might run out of is this gold color. And the place that this could happen would be on the final border once you have picked your stitches up. So now that some of you will be getting really far into the shawl and we'll be talking about this pickup, we're going to give you a hint about what to do if you run out of this particular color. So you do have enough yarn of some of the other colors in order to be able to substitute there. But the instructions there, the tips for working the pattern do mention that. Now, one of the big things that I want to cover in this particular meeting that's mentioned in the tips for working the pattern is when you're picking up the stitches for the border, you're going to have a table that will tell you how many stitches to pick up in each section. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of how to do that because I know not everybody has picked up stitches for something like this. And it's like, how do you pick up the stitches when the edge stitches slip? So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks there. But the table is in there because that way you don't have to figure out how many stitches to allocate to each section. You just pick them up for each section one at a time, and then it's going to go a lot more smoothly for you. Okay, I have my little outline here, but I covered it up carefully because that's what one does. At least there isn't a cat on it. There's one lurking around who will probably come and Zoom bomb us, but you know, it's always nice to check in with Lily and see how she's doing. So, reminder about color choices. You can change your colors throughout this shawl. The shawl does use 5 colors, and you do need 2 light, 1 medium, and 2 dark to get your best contrast. But if you're finding as you get into the shawl that you're not as happy with your color choices as you could be. So for example, you've done the first one of the mosaic sections and you're like, I don't know if I'm really happy with the contrast there. There's no reason why you can't pick up a different pair of colors for this particular section. They are repeated throughout the shawl. You can see there are 3 borders using those colors, but feel free to change them up. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, and you can have some fun with it if each one of those borders is a little different. So if you've decided to use stash, for example, and you've got some part balls of DK weight yarn, you certainly could play with your colors a little bit there. Just remember that you need 1 light and 1 dark when you're doing the mosaic, because you do need that contrast for the patterns to show really well. Also, if you are substituting in some additional yarns, or you've decided to go for some extra yarn because maybe your shawl's coming out a bit big, remember that it's easier to knit the shawl out of non-superwash yarn, but you can mix and match them because mosaic is very, very forgiving. Superwash will cause your yarn to stretch out a little bit more because it's very slippery and it doesn't cling on to itself. So if you're also a novice at things like mosaic or stranded color work, if you get into more of that sort of thing, then non-superwash will cling to itself a little bit better and make it easier. But I have definitely done projects where I have mixed and matched them and you can get away with it. The reason I bring this up is because we've had some really fun questions throughout the course of the last 2 weeks. And people, and I'll get to that chat question because there's a great one there. People have been asking some really cool questions like, you know, well, what do I do if I don't like my contrast? Or what do I do if I want to put more colors in because I'm having so much fun with it? And that's why I wanted to give you some suggestions there about where you could play with more colors or change it up if you weren't happy. If you've already done that one border, by the way, and you're changing up your colors, there's no reason why you can't just leave it there. You don't have to rip it back. Just leave that one there with a little less contrast and have more contrast where the birds are, because quite bluntly, the birds are the ones where you're going to want the more contrast so that you can see them and their little fluffy tails and their little feet and so on. This one, it's pretty easy to see because it's a plain Greek key and the eye will follow it quite well. So yeah, if you're playing with colors, that would be the way to do it, is leave that one, don't make yourself go back, and just change it out for the birds. You can, of course, also change the one on the end here. It is a fairly distinct pattern. So again, if you're not happy with your contrast, this would be one you can either leave or you can change it out. It's very flexible. So we had a question in the chat, which is, can you use Nettle Soft DK in this shawl? Yes, you could definitely knit this shawl with Nettle Soft DK. I will warn you that it's going to feel a little different. So if you're using that yarn, it's really interesting because of the nettle content. So what happens is the wool is all like, I'm going to scrunch up together. And the nettle's like, what are you doing? So you'll knit your shawl and you'll think, my God, it's a teeny tiny little piece of work. Maybe my gauge is off. Nah, block it, because that's when it will actually hold its shape and you'll be able to tell whether you're on gauge or off gauge. You can mix it together with the Lasco DK. I actually had those yarns made so that they would knit to a very similar gauge. So if you really want to play around with some looks on this shawl, yes, you could mix in some Nettle DK and see what happens there. I would probably test it in a swatch just to make sure that your colors are going to work together, but it would be a lot of fun to see it, because one of the neat things about Roman mosaics is they didn't just use rocks. They used ceramics, so glazed ceramics, and they used glass in their mosaics too. Good Lord, all of a sudden everything started quivering to the side because a giant lily pad is trying to get on the table here with me. Anyway, so they used glass and ceramics, and so the mosaics would have shiny elements to them. So putting something shiny like the Nettle DK in there could be really intriguing, because then you're doing what the ancient Romans would have done, which was to highlight certain areas based on the materials. It also gave them a way to get some really subtle colors, because of course they used a lot of beautiful stone, but they couldn't get all the colors, you know, of the rainbow. And I want to show you something. I'm actually going to share my screen because there was something that came up just recently in the news, and it's a brand new find of a mosaic, and it's so pretty. So I just wanted to show you this to you, because how interesting is this one? So this is reported in the BBC, and this is a find in Britain, and they have found a new house with this amazing mosaic. And so you'll see that it's not cleaned up yet, but it's quite elaborate. So you've got quite some mythology in there. And some of these colors are very likely either ceramic or glass, because they would have needed those in order to get these really elaborate mosaics. So anyway, if you want to look that up, it's a really interesting find and a really interesting house that they have discovered. And I would definitely have a look and read about it. If you go and search for Roman Villa in the news, you should get the BBC article, and the BBC has some lovely pictures of this house and then a really good explanation of how the house is shaped. So we have done our introduction, and now that means that what we're going to do is do our first prize draw, because I don't want to leave them all to the end. I like to space them out throughout because that's more fun. So Wendy is going to go and she's going to randomly draw somebody who is in the meeting right now, and then she's going to announce it in the chat. Ah, I see a posterior of a lily. And then she'll also break in and she'll let us know name-wise who has won. If you are the winner of this lovely Orenburg shawl, and here it is. This is another one of my designs. This is a single skein shawl, and it'll be the pattern and yarn. So what you're going to do is you're going to email us at sales@ancientartsfiber.com, and that will go straight to Wendy, who can set up your prize and get it shipped out to you. For colors, this is a very forgiving shawl. Let's put the picture back up so you know what I'm talking about. This is a very forgiving shawl, so you can pick anything in our Socknado that's in stock. You could also, if you want a really drapey version, pick from the merino silk, and you can use the revival. So Angela is the first prize winner. And in case we have more than one Angela, Wendy, can you put the last name in too, if the last name is showing? Otherwise, if you can direct message that person just so they know they're the correct Angela. Because I know that the last meeting we had a couple of Angelas. And if you just want to turn on your mic and let her know.
Hello, my name is Angela.
Hi, Angela.
Hi,
Wendy,
Angela.
turn
Hi,
your mic
my
on.
name.
Wendy, your mic's off.
I'm back. I said I need more fingers. I can't type, look, and do everything at once. But I just direct messaged Angela to let her know she is the winner.
Perfect.
Because she doesn't have a last name up.
Congratulations, Angela, and thank you for chipping in and saying hi to us. I am really glad that you won. That's very exciting, and I hope you enjoy the shawl. It's a very different construction from this one in one way, but you'll notice a certain similarity in terms of the way that the border is attached on the top. So this one is inspired by shawls from Russia, from the Orenburg region, and they're really interestingly constructed because you start off by knitting that lace band at the bottom of the shawl first, then you pick up stitches in the slip stitch along the side. Might be a little familiar with this one. And then from there, you knit up the body of the shawl, and then you knit the top on, a border on the top, which then gets rid of the live stitches at once. So it's a really interesting shawl to knit because it gives you that technique without it being a giant Orenburg shawl that takes years to knit, because boy, they are amazing and complicated. But for a lot of us, it takes quite a long time to knit the traditional ones. If you're interested, by the way, in Orenburg shawls, I know that Interweave is doing some live classes with a lady whose name I always get wrong. Her first name is Galina, and then I always pronounce the last name wrong because I forget a syllable. But anyway, she's an amazing instructor who knows a ton about these shawls, and I highly recommend either her videos or this online class. So just for you people who are really aficionados of interesting shawl construction, totally recommend it. I am not paid for this review. Okay, so we have talked about some of the basics that we wanted to review, and then to just bring them back up again, because if you want to do some yarn substitution or some playing around with your mosaic tiles, that's great. One of the things that I thought would be a little bit a little bit more fun would be to give you a little more history again on Roman villas. So I'm going to do another screen share here, because one of the joys of designing this shawl was going back to my archaeology degree and sharing some of the things that I find particularly fascinating. Another good resource, if you want to learn some more about these, is check out Time Team. You can see them on both Amazon Prime, and you can also see them on YouTube. And they have been doing a lot through the years with excavating Roman villas. And I was super excited because when I initially published this shawl, I actually ended up getting one of them talking to me, and I just about lost my mind. So that was really cool. So I'm going to do a little bit. Philippa's asking, did I read the book, The Dig? Yes. And there's also that movie that they made now on Netflix. Really enjoyable and fairly accurate too. So highly recommend that too. So this is kind of fun because this is a plan of a Roman villa, and they would follow a rather similar shape no matter where they were. And they would do this throughout centuries of growth. So you would start off with a house that was rectangular and that had an open center, as you can see in this plot. I do find it interesting that all of the names here are still in the original Latin because, of course, let's face it, Roman's official language was Latin. But you would get a house that could be built, and it would have the open center. Okay, somebody muted me. As the family would get bigger, as they would have more industry, as they would get more money, they would often build on to their houses. So you would get these additional sections of house built on, and you would often get a second story or even a third story added to the house. And if you look there, you can see corridors with rooms around them. So the rooms would be on the outside, and then you would have your inner part of the house that would be colonnaded and open to the air. And that's where you would find your mosaics, would be on those floors there. And the other place they would often be would be in like dining rooms and formal reception rooms and so on. So in this particular instance, you'd see a lot of mosaics in the left-hand side of this particular house. And then you'd see them around that open area on the right. So rather an interesting shape, and they could be very, very large. Some of these houses could be hundreds of meters wide, which I think is quite amazing. And they could become very, very large centers of trade and commerce. So Time Team has a few very interesting examples. I just happen to be real fans of Time Team, but it's a fun way to go and look them up, and you get to hear a lot of different things about them in terms of like the construction of the houses. And then you also get to see a very cute guy named Matt trundling around being made to be a Roman slave for a while they're excavating a house in the rain. So, you know, can't go wrong with that. Cute archaeologists for the win. Another thing that I wanted to tell you a little bit more about this time is the frescoes that you would find in houses. So this one here is a fresco that is on the walls of one of the houses in Pompeii. But this is the same way that frescoes would be done all over the Roman Empire. So what they would do is they would construct their walls, and then they would plaster them, get them all smooth and ready, and then they would put a fresh layer of plaster on, and they would paint right into the plaster. And this is a style of artwork that actually went for millennia. So you'll find them even, for example, in the Sistine Chapel. So Michelangelo was creating the art in the Sistine Chapel by working on fresh plaster. And I can't even imagine the challenge and stress of painting something as elaborate and gorgeous as this when you've only got a certain number of hours before your surface dries, and then that's it, game over, thank you for playing. There were always some very interesting elements in these frescoes. Like you can see here, they liked really vivid colors. And they had a real thing for red. So you'd have these flamboyant, vividly colored walls. They weren't like us who like our nice neutrals and maybe our soft grays and maybe a little bit of blue. Nope, they went for the gusto. Lots of reds and lots of blues and lots of greens. And you'll notice that there's borders there too. So the frescoes often echoed the kind of things that you would see on the floors. So you can see the Greek key style patterns in there. And then you can see that they were often done to represent rather like a painting, in that they would have borders. So they would have borders around each panel. And these could illustrate all sorts of different things. So you could get pictures of mythology. So you could have gods and goddesses doing things. You could have stories depicted on the walls. You could have the social status to which you wanted to belong or which you did belong to depicted. So for example, here you see family scenes with some rather, shall we say, well-to-do people. They have slaves and servants, and they're lounging about and eating and enjoying their lives. So you would see all sorts of pictures like this. You'll see a lot of humorous things. You'll see a lot of battle scenes and things like that, but they were always really elaborate and really gorgeous and very vividly colored. This is another example, and it mentions here in this particular detail about tricking the eye, and that's one of the things that you often see in these frescoes. They are trying to make you think that you're looking out a window. So another subject that was very popular is like this, where you see temples and the city, and down below, it looks like you've got a short wall. So they would often do things like this because it made it feel like the space was more open. So you'd get sky scenes and nature scenes. They're very, very, very fond of depicting gardens, for example. So beautiful gardens with olive trees and flowers and things like that. So very elaborate art, very beautiful art. And you can see again that really popular use of reds. They love their reds, those Romans. And then this is another example here. And these were all going through different centuries. I've chosen them so that you have different centuries, but you can see there's a common thread running through them. And again, in this one, you've got a section at the back there where it's like a window looking to the outdoors with a family scene. You have something that actually looks like pictures framed on the wall. And then you have a whole lot of various gods and goddesses spread out throughout the walls, but very different from our rooms, very narrow, very tall with high ceilings and very, very vividly colored. So what I did in the shawl to pick up on that was that one section that I called the fresco section. We have this, holding it up to the camera, and you can see that what this does is it emulates those borders around those fresco panels. I really had the temptation to try and put some gods and goddesses in here, and then I realized that was way too complicated. But it was a lot of fun having a look at these frescoes to get a feel for the kinds of borders that they would put in there, because the shawl really is very much like a walk around a Roman villa. So if you think about it as you're knitting these sections, you're going from room to room, and occasionally you're going down the halls, and you're getting a real view of all the different things that a Roman might have in their house. All righty. So that brings us to halfway almost through our Zoom. And at this point in time, we're going to do a second draw for a prize. So in this one, we're going to feature a Notions kit with I apparently, when I'm not looking at them, didn't know how to use them, beautiful folding scissors. And they come in these really sweet little pouches. And you're going to get a Notions kit that includes these lovely folding scissors and then some stitch markers. And what all do we have in here? Snazzy folding scissors I wrote, row counters, a lovely kitty cat inspired needle gauge, and such like items. So our staff really have a lot of fun putting together these pretty and fun Notion packs. So that's what we're going to draw for now. So Wendy is busily going through random number generating, and Christine M is our prize winner for our first Notions pack.
Wow, thank you. That's so surprising. I just joined because I fell in love with your shawl and had to make it. So I just liked listening to you do the history.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations and thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad to have you here. So for those who have not yet won a prize, there are 2 more. The other thing that I'm going to be doing, by the way, this weekend is that I love prizes and I love giving out prizes. It's like being Santa Claus at Christmas for me. And it's like, sometimes they have to restrain me. So if you have not yet posted a progress photo somewhere, you want to go to Instagram and post using the hashtag Roman Villa Shawl. You don't have to put KAL in there, but I'll check both in case. Or you can go to our Facebook group and you can post a picture in there. Or you can go to Ravelry and we have a thread and you can post there. And if you can't find any of the rest of them, find one of my Roman Villa Shawl KAL posts on Facebook. And if you put it in the comments, then you'll also be entered. So what I'm going to do this weekend is I'm going to draw a halfway through the KAL prize for each one of those places. Yes, you can enter more than once. Yes, you can enter on all of those different spots. Feel free to do it. The more entries, the better. Gives you a chance to win something yummy, because we definitely have some yummy stuff. I'm not going to admit it to anybody except you guys, but we may have got more lovely knitting needle stock in. So yeah, Wendy's like, stop it, you. And I'm like, no, I must give them away. So yeah, make sure to enter and win some goodies. And Dan is reminding us, prize winners, please email Wendy at sales@ancientartsfiber.com so that you can claim your prize. Alrighty, so now let's do some tips and tricks on the next part of this shawl. So we've been zooming along, and this is where, Dan, I'm going to get you to spotlight our document camera. We have this fantastic camera, and he worked really hard on getting the resolution fixed on this, so we should be able to see it a lot better this time. Ooh, look at that, it even autofocuses. So once you've got the main part of this shawl knit, you're going to be picking up stitches for this gold border here. And this is what I wanted to give you some help with. When you're picking up these stitches, the gauge in each one of these sections is a bit different because slip stitches will pull in more than these will, and your mosaic will pull in even more than the slip stitch section, and then these twisted stitch sections don't pull in much at all. So there is a table in your pattern, and it's going to tell you how many stitches to pick up in each section. So don't forget to use that, because I have done all the mathing for you in advance so that you don't have to figure out how many stitches to pick up in each section. So this is the table. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, in section 1, I need to pick up 66 stitches. In section 2, which would be that first border, I'm going to pick up 22 stitches, and so on. So make sure you use the table, because this takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. It also means that it doesn't feel quite as onerous, because if you think about it as individual sections, then you're going to be good to go in terms of picking them up. And you can also set it down and come back to it later and not be out in terms of how many stitches you've picked up. Because I don't know how many of you are prone to knitting giant shawls, but if you have to pick a border up on a giant shawl and you forget where you are, it's pretty much something that you want to rip your hair out about. So how do we pick up these stitches? I've had a few people ask me over the time that this pattern has been out, how we do this. And we have a wonderful person named Tanya who actually shared with me some photos of various different things that she was wondering about in terms of, is this how you handle a needle? So I'm going to show you her pictures that she very kindly sent to me, because she was wondering, is it done this way? Or is it done this way, which is going through the slipped stitch? Or is it done like this? Or is it done like that? So these are all sorts of different ways that you might want to pick up. And I'm seeing a great comment in the chat, which yes. So before you go and you pick up your stitches, if you block the shawl, the center point, you're going to find it's easier. And that's because it will open this up a bit and you'll actually be able to see the edge a little better. So when I stretch this out, you can see that that edge is a lot easier to view than when it's unblocked. This swatch is unblocked because not all of us are going to want to block it in advance, but it definitely helps because it means that the shawl will lie flat for your pickup. Come here, shawl. So when I'm picking up, if it's blocked, it just lies there and behaves itself. If it's not blocked, it's a little bit contracted. So that's the only reason why you would block it, is that it does make it easier. It also means when you go and do the final blocking on the shawl, it's really easy because all that you're having to worry about is that final border at that point. Everything else is lying straight and flat and behaving itself. So to answer the question that I was asked about, oh dear God, I just realized that I did not give myself a spare needle for this. So we'll just put my other swatch on the middle of this needle. To answer the question about how you're picking these up, in the first section of the shawl, you have to pick up 66 stitches. And if you're math oriented, you'll figure out that you have 64 rows and you have to pick up 66 stitches. So you don't have to do that math, but I'm just telling you that you have to pick up a lot of stitches along here. And if you went and you picked them up in the slipped stitch, what would happen is you'd get holes if you pick up 2 stitches in there. Now that could give you an interesting lacy effect, but in other parts of the shawl, you won't be picking up 2 for every single one of the slipped stitches, which means that you would have an inconsistent set of holes around there. So we don't want to do that. You'll note that we have 66 stitches to pick up, 64 rows, but the reason that we have 2 extra is we want to get them on the point of the shawl. So this is the tip of our shawl and we're going to pick up 2 stitches on the tip. To pick up, what we're going to do is go in a stitch. We don't want to go right on the very edge because again, you get those loose floppy bits and we don't want that. So we're going to go in a stitch. So I'm hoping that people can see that. And please pardon the massive amount of dye left on my hands. Apparently I was doing a lot of dyeing today. So we go in and this is below the first cast on edge there. And it means that it's going to give me a nice solid pickup. Can't see it very well. Okay, so let's let this thing autofocus. So this is the tip of the shawl and we're going to pick up 2 stitches. And when you look at it, you're going to have a natural point to pick up here. Come on, you, tip over. Here. And then you'll have another one here. So that's where you'll pick up those 2 extra in that section. So you're going to put 2 in the tip of the shawl, and then you're going to go along the side that has your increases. So you don't want to accidentally flip your shawl over. You want to pick up along the side that you've been doing your make one lefts on. When we do this, again, like I say, we don't want to pick up inside your slipped stitch, letting our camera focus, because what happens is that you get that big loop. So you see that when you go and move that loop, there's another strand there. That's the first stitch. So you see this strand here? That's where you want to do your pickup, tilting it. So you've got 3 strands of yarn in between your needle and the stitch that you're picking up, and that's going to give you a nice firm edge. So let's look at the original shawl here so that you can see that. And I'm actually going to lift this up some more. And what you'll see that I did here, that's reasonable, is that, so you've got the slip stitch, you've gone 1 stitch in, which gives you your 3 strands of yarn, because you've got 2 strands from the loop of the slip stitch, and then you've got 1 extra. And I pick up 2 stitches in that space. So let's see what that looks like on here. Oh, look, I even have some gold. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to pick up these 2. Get out of the way, you. And this is going to feel weird because you're picking up through a rather thick piece of fabric, but it's going to give you a nice solid edge without a bunch of holes later on. So you see how I've now picked up 2 stitches. Let's let this focus. Come on, little camera. On the tip of the shawl, and then we go to the very first slip stitch and we move in a little bit, and then we're going to pick up 2 in there. And I will demonstrate this along the edge so that we can get a good camera view. So you see how that now pulls the tip of the shawl a little bit more pointy? So that's why when you look at the tip of my shawl and the tip of what you've knit so far, they might not look the same. And it's all about how that got picked up. You see how it looks pointy there? It's because that'll pull your tip around a little bit when you pick up 2 on the tip of it. So you get a little teeny bump on the back, which you'll never notice later, and then you get a nice straight edge there. So as we go along and pick up, we're just going to go to the next slip stitch and we're going to go in a stitch. Whoa. Come on, camera. Oh my God, my fingers look terrible like this, don't they? So you see how there's the slip stitch on the edge and now we're 1 stitch in. So you see how there's 3 strands of yarn on my needle? That's where we'll pick up our stitch. Get in there, you. So we've picked up 1 in there. We need to pick up another in there. And we have a nice, solid, firm, oops. Okay, so that was, yeah, something. Okay, this is really fun. So I just made the boo-boo that I wanted to warn you about. If you pick up 2 in the same loop, it isn't going to work. You would have to do it as a purl. So what we're going to do is move the needle over just slightly to pick up not in the same loop. There we go. So you've got 2 for the space of that slip stitch on the edge, but they're not going through the same hole. So then I go to the next slip stitch, which is here, and I'm going to pick up 2 there by going in 1 stitch. And then you can't go through the same hole or you'll have a problem. Do you see that hole there by my nasty colored thumb? Then we'll move over 1 and we'll pick up. So this gives a nice firm edge. If you had fastened that in properly, that would be nice and firm too. And you'll have a fairly what feels like thick ridge on the back of your knitting. So you see that ridge there? That's the slit stitch. Now this stabilizes your shawl. And when I look at the original, you can see that there. It's not going to stick up as much once you block your shawl. That just beds all nicely down together and it's no longer a big nasty ridge here. But it's really important because this means that your shawl can't stretch too much. You see how it only has a certain amount of stretch, which means that this very elastic bit isn't going to sag, whereas the parts that are done in mosaic are stronger and they are less prone to sagging. This means the whole thing becomes one continuous fabric that's going to have the same amount of elasticity along that edge. It means that you're not going to have disparate amounts of sagging there. So is everybody understanding what we're doing with the picking up the stitches? You can unmute and ask or just mention in the chat. And would anybody like me to do some more of those?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have our slip stitch here. This is what I do to figure out where I am. So we find that slip stitch, move in one stitch, and then you'll get 3 strands of yarn on your needle. You can see them there on my document camera. That's where you would make your stitch. So it's like, holy moly, I'm knitting around this thing. Don't let that weird you out. It's just fine. And then to make our second stitch in there, we just move over 1 thread. And then we don't end up with a big weird loopy thing. So for the next one, I find my loop here on the side. Come on, camera. There we go. And then I'm going to move in 1 strand of yarn. It's really easy in this particular stitch pattern to see these, by the way. If it was different, then like a different stitch pattern, you wouldn't see them as clearly. So now I have this loop here, and what I'm going to do is move over to this little knob that's next to it, stick my needle in there. That separates those 2 stitches with a strand of yarn in between them, and see how that hole magically closes up too? So we do have a little bit of mesh going on, but we do with the entire set of stitches here. So in this particular section, you're picking up 66, and it works out that you are just going to do 2 for each one of these loops on the side. Now, in other places like the mosaic, you're going to actually be picking up fewer stitches in there. And you can see my pickup in here. So fewer stitches per number of rows. And the reason for this is because the gauge is different. So the gauge is consistent in this band. You want an even number of stitches picked up for every inch of fabric, but sometimes the number of rows is going to vary per inch. So that's why I have the table for you to tell you how many stitches to pick up in there. If you were picking up fewer stitches than you had numbers of rows, then what you would do is just pick up behind one of the slip stitches and then move to the next one. So on some of them, like this one, you can see there's 2 picked up, and then I've skipped a slip stitch and then picked up 2. All of this is going to come out in the blocking. You really can't do this wrong. If you don't have them exactly perfectly evenly spaced, you'll never know later. There's not enough there to be really a problem. So what I'm saying is that if 2 ended up close to each other and then there's a space for another one, it's just like a button band on a sweater. You really don't have to worry about it. It will look very nicely, lay very nicely, and you won't see anything wrong later on. Now in this section here, the twisting ribbons section, you're picking up again on an edge with a slip stitch, and you're going to move in 1. And that means that on the increase side, you're going to be picking up again in the same place that you were going to get that 3rd leg. And that's created by your make 1 left. When you go to the decrease side and you're picking up your stitches, it looks a little different because you've got your SSK. So you see how there's a little wee hole in places? So this is going to happen. Don't worry about it. Again, once you block your shawl, this is going to mostly disappear. But when you pick up on the edge, you have to move in 1. And so sometimes that's going to pick up around the SSK, and you'll just get that little row of dotty things there. If they really bug you, just move a little further in. And again, you can get a ridge on the back, but it's not going to be a problem. It will bed in nicely. But just be aware of on the decrease side with the SSKs, it looks a little different than it does on the increase side. And that's because of the way that they're being decreased. So you see here, it looks pretty much the same, but in the twisting ribbons part, it looks a little different. So it's only in this particular section here where you're going to get that little dot, 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 dot along there. And it's just a feature of the way that it's constructed, and no one will ever notice it later on. It's only because this is under a nice magnified camera that you can see it. Now, the other thing that I wanted to tell you about is that there is this section of the shawl here, and this is your next border once you have picked up. So you're going to do 2 rows in this particular color. They blend right in on this section, but they show nicely here. And then you're going to switch to doing another section of mosaic. Now, this one is really interesting because this gives you a chance to try doing mosaic both as stocking stitch and as garter stitch. Now, if you are intimidated by that idea, you can do it all as garter. It will not harm it in the least if you do it all as garter. And I've seen some finished shawls where people made that design decision for themselves, and it was really pretty. It looked great. So you don't have to worry about that. I'm going to give you a couple of tips if you're doing it in the way that the pattern is written. But first, oh boy, it's another prize. All right, Wendy, you can work on drawing the prize. And then if you want to just let me know when you've got that name in there, then we can get on with that. Okay, so when we go to work this border, this is really, really simple. It's much less complex than this because you're just doing these little rectangles. One of them is going this direction, one is going this direction. It's still mosaic, but in here, you're going to actually be purling in this section on the backside row. So that's the difference is here it's always garter, so you're always knitting, and here you're purling on this one. When you do this, you're still having to slip your yarn. So you're still stranding across the back of one stitch, but what I want you to do in the stocking stitch sections is make that loop really loose. So stick your needle in it and pull it out a little bit loose, because when you block the shawl, all of those will disappear and you'll get a nice smooth surface there and it won't pull in here. If you forget, not a disaster, but what'll happen is that this will pull in and it'll be almost sort of like candies. So it'll look like that in terms of what it'll do in terms of pulling. So if you make your strands really loose in the stocking stitch section, then that will help your tension there, and it will mean that you'll get this very straight border just like this. So that was something that I wanted to show you, is that this is stocking stitch, so it's purled on the back part, this section only, and it's garter here. The interesting thing about doing it this way is that the garter actually pulls in tighter than stocking stitch, so that also helps you in tensioning the 2 sections. Giving it a little bit of slack here will help, but this will actually pull in a lot more than stocking stitch does. So because this wants to pull in because it's stranded, the 2 of them come out pretty balanced, but you can help it by giving it just that little extra bit of yarn there. All right, Dan, you can take the spotlight off this now. And this is a chance at this point in time for people to ask any questions they want to, and then we can start showing off our progress. So please de-spotlight the camera.
Can I suggest that Wendy announce the prize winner?
Yes, go for it, Wendy. Okay, you're having problems with your microphone right now, and I'm just going to quickly go through the chat. Maybe Dan, if you can read out that, because poor Wendy is having technical issues.
Sure, the prize winner is Sarah. So if you can, like I say, email your address information to Wendy. She's at sales@ancientartsfiber.com. Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, Sarah.
Congrats. So I've got some great questions in the chat that I'm just going to address. So 2 picked up stitches for each slip stitch. In this particular section, yes. If you're wondering how many to pick up for each slip stitch, what you can do is say, okay, this section, which for the second section, let's use it as an example. In this part here, I realize that you can't see my document camera. In this part here, we're going to pick up 22 along the edge. Just count the number of slip stitches along the edge there, and then you'll figure out whether you need to put 2 for each slip stitch or 1, because in some places that's going to happen. So it's not always 2 picked up stitches for each slip stitch, but in every section that's got this particular stitch, this one here, then yes, it will be 2 for every slip stitch. So you can just fly be free and space them out however you want to making sure that you have 22, for example, in this part, or you can count the slip stitches. There are some of us who prefer to math this out carefully in advance, and then there are some of us who just go for the gusto. Either way will work, but you will know that in each section, you have to pick up a certain number of stitches. So for this section here, you have to pick up 27 stitches. So what you can do if you want to is count the number of slip stitches along the edge and then pick up based on that. Or like I say, just fly be free and pick up. Either way works. It's all in what you're most comfortable with. Okay, I've always picked up using only one needle. Seeing you use the left-hand needle seems to make the process much easier. Yeah, I used to only pick up using one needle, and then I realized that on these really long borders, that using the two needles and treating it as if you're knitting it made it much simpler, because you didn't have to try and juggle the weight on the needle. Because as you get that border picked up, it's going to get heavier and heavier because you've got a whole bunch of shawl hanging off of it. So I do really enjoy that. So thank you for mentioning that. Love the details. Thank you for enjoying the details, people. I really had a lot of fun working out these tables for you. And I'm a real math person, I hate to admit, because I always thought of myself as a non-math person. So working them out gave me great joy, and including them in there, I'm glad to know that it's useful. There's some lovely comments. Thank you so much. Laughing over, thank goodness, of the knitting geeks. Yep. Some of us are definitely geeks. Okay, so there's some people asking for colors and so on they'd like to see. So why don't we do some show and tell right now? I know that Wendy has a very interesting and pretty version with a substitution where we dyed Emerald Isle for her. So if you want to spotlight Wendy, Dan, so she can show off her shawl. So she's using kit number 2, but we've substituted in Emerald Isle. So that gave her a nice dark color there.
I can hardly wait to see what the mosaic's going to be like when I get to the Irish linen and the Emerald Isle there. I think it's going to be so pretty.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay, if you can take that spotlight off, Dan. So would anybody else like to share their progress? Okay, Tanya, I can see you. It looks amazing. Beautiful work. So Tanya's knitting the second shawl that she's done here in the original colors, and it is absolutely exquisite. So feel free, by the way, now, guys, to unmute, and you can ask any questions, share stuff. That's interesting. Oh, okay, so somebody was hoping for the third kit. Isn't that beautiful? Absolutely lovely. Would anybody else like to share? And if you unmute and talk, then it'll spotlight you automatically.
Here's
look at
mine.
Allison.
Yeah.
Allison.
This is I went with, I had to work from stash, so I ended up with a striped yarn, but I've liked it. I like it. Yeah.
Gorgeous. That is gorgeous.
Yeah. So Allison, we saw it on social media and we all lost our minds over it. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? It's beautiful. Yeah, really excited about that one.
I misread the fresco bit and didn't do the slip in front. So my fresco looks quite different. But it's still beautiful. It's still a neat pattern, so I've left it.
Well, see, that's a design feature. You have now designed a new fresco. So it's a different order, probably different century.
Somebody was asking what the striped yarn is that Allison was using.
Oh, crepes. I'd have to go look it up. It's not actually a wool. It's not a very tight span. And it's got a bit of a shine to it, probably from Michael's. As I said, I went with stash.
So thank you, Allison. I'm actually going to change a little bit about what we're doing. Why don't we have the people who would like to do some show and tell, put your hand up. And then what we can do is we can have Dan spotlight you, because then that'll make it a little bit easier. I wasn't sure how many would want to show off, but it's really lovely to see how many people would like to. So Dan, if you just want to go to our first person with the hand up, on my screen, it's Pippa. And if you want to spotlight Pippa.
Yes, I used lichen because I love the colors in lichen. There's a little bit of the rust and a little bit of the green. You can't really see it. And then I changed this. I know you can't really see the birds that well, but I loved how it matched the fresco on the bottom. And it's kind of muted, but
I love it, Pippa. That's a really, really interesting way to do it. And it's beautiful. It's very, very nice in terms of like, you know, some of the mosaics are very soft in color. So that really kind of evokes those particular examples. Lovely. Thank you. Okay, because we are getting low on time, Dan, I'm just going to get you to move to the next person. And if you can put your hand down once you're finished. Sandra, thank you for sharing.
Oh, hi. I haven't got as far as a lot of other people, but I'm pleased with what I've done. And it's using more muted colors altogether. And that was that I found the mosaic difficult because I wasn't reading the pattern correctly. I was trying to strand across as I was going, and you don't need to at all. You just keep that extra strand sitting there till 2 rows later. So I was making it overcomplicated and I had to take it out 3 times.
Oh
no. But you know, that's part of the learning, right? And the other thing I didn't realize was until Wendy sent me a prize last time, and what I didn't realize is where it says move the, what was it called? Move the marker, not remove marker, but where you move the marker from one side to the other. I wasn't doing that because I was using markers like this, and they go on the stitch, but only, and then they stay there. And so I wasn't actually moving the marker, I was slipping the stitch. I don't know. Anyway, I worked that out later as well, that it's much easier to have a marker that fits on the needle than under the needle. So again, I'm not used to using markers. So it's just sometimes what you think is simple terminology is just beyond me. But I love the sheen, and it probably will be droopy. It's not superwash, but it's milk yarn and yarn made from peppermint. So it's non-wool. Anyway, I'm happy, thanks.
Well, that was lovely. It's a beautiful shawl, Pippa, and it's really neat to, you know, from my perspective, to see that it's giving you learning opportunities, and I think you've mastered them beautifully. I don't know that your shawl will sag. I think it's actually going to be really nice. It won't sag. I would say, don't eat the yarn, Lily, honestly. Sorry, guys. I have a cat sitting beside me. Dan, if you can take the spotlight off Sandra, and she's attempting, stop it. She's attempting to eat a ball of yarn. She never normally does this. Anyway, it will have more drape because of the fiber content, but it's not going to sag. So I think you're going to be just fine. All right, is there somebody else who would like to share? If you want to spotlight the next person, Dan, and let us know who. Silence. Dan.
Sorry, it's not letting me spotlight Angela. She's got her hand up, but I don't think she's got her camera on, so I can't spotlight her.
Ah, that would be a problem.
I have my camera on. You know what? I think the problem is I'm using the web version, not the downloaded version. Anyways, thanks.
Well, sorry we couldn't show your shawl, but lovely to hear from you nonetheless. So is there anybody else with their hand up? Oh, I see somebody.
I just got here a few minutes ago because I had a mad race all the way across the metro area in commute traffic and hoping to get here in time. So I don't have much done, but I'm this far. And as you can see, my cables are too short to go any further. So one of my errands was to the yarn shop an hour away to get longer cables. So now I can keep going.
I hear you, but it's looking great. And you know, it's all a meditative process. So I just want to remind everybody too that, you know, we don't expect everybody to finish this shawl by the end of the KAL. The point of it was just simply, you know, to give you a lot of assistance along the way, and then we can all celebrate something that we're doing together. But thank you so much for sharing that. It's really beautiful. Your attention is so exquisite. All righty. Is there anybody else, Dan, that has their hand up? Oh, Pauline is putting her hand up in person.
Hi.
So
Hi.
Hi.
I didn't get my yarn from you, but I had yarn, and this is what I came up with.
Oh, that is pretty. Very nice.
I'm happy with it. I don't think my birds are going to show quite as much but I think when it's blocked, it'll be good.
Yeah, definitely mosaic can, it can become more crisp and easy to see once you block it. I can see on the camera, so I'm pretty sure if I can see them on the camera that you're going to have a good success once you block them.
Right.
Yeah, it's lovely.
The other color I had was this green that I have in here. And I decided I didn't want that in the back. So I will put some green in the border.
Nice.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pauline. So Dan, our next person would be Christine M. if you want to spotlight Christine.
Hi, I should warn you, I'm a left-handed knitter, so I mirror knit. So it might look a little bit different than everybody else's. I just like to forewarn people because they get really confused when they see my knitting. But I ended up using stash yarn because I didn't know about this until the last minute. And I'm in the US and you're in Canada. So I was like, oh, I'll just use stash yarn. But it is coming out really lovely. I used mostly neutrals. So instead of the gold, I used a brown, which my camera is terrible, so you can't really see colors. And then I just started the middle bit, but I ended up having to go buy stash yarn. I had to go buy yarn for it because I didn't have a red that I liked. So I'm just starting, I'm literally like 4 rows in. But it is such a fun pattern. It is so interesting. And I've just been obsessed with knitting it every single night. So...
Well, it's beautiful, and I highly approve of using stash yarn because let's face it, sometimes one has to do something with it. So that's one of the reasons why I definitely wanted to make sure that everybody was welcome in this KAL, because I am one of those people who often has to do that because it's starting to take over the world. Okay, so why don't we go now, Dan, to Jennifer? She has her hand up, and if you can...
I'm going to unmute. So, I bought your kit as soon as it came out, and I was so excited when you said that you were going to do a knit along in the new year so I could finish all of my Christmas presents, which I did. But because I've been doing a lot of knitting while I've been on meetings, I haven't been fabulous at following the pattern, or I've been better at following the charts than actually reading the pattern. So I started to kind of incorporate the knit and the purl rows before, in the increase and the decrease sections of the twisted stitch.
Gotta break in and tell you I love it, and I really wanted to do that, but my tech editor was like, no more charts, no. Bad.
I really like the way it looks, so it'll be interesting to see how it looks when I start to pick up the stitches, but I have just been obsessed with this and I adore this. And even my husband, who doesn't like it when I am knitting, has said that he really loves this pattern. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you. It's beautiful, and I love that, because I will admit that at first I did that too. And then it was like, I had to explain, well, there's going to be like some extra charts, and it was like, bad, no, stop. And I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, that's a very fun modification. I love it. Okay, is there anybody else who has their hand up? I can't really see right now. Let's go and look. All right, well, I think everybody who wanted to has shared at this point in time. So thank you so much for being willing to do that, everybody. It's just such a treat to see what everyone is working on. And I really get a kick out of seeing the colors that you've chosen. That is so much fun. So now we have the last of our 4 prizes to give out here. And that will be a second set of the notions. And this time we're going to do the rainbow scissors, which comes with this adorable pouch from the Mindful collection put out by Knitter's Pride. And look how cute these are. So the nice thing about these folding scissors is that you can put them away and take them with you, and they don't take a lot of space up, but they're beautifully sharp and they're perfect for cutting all sorts of yarn, embroidery thread, things like that. And I didn't even know about these until Wendy pointed them out to me. She said, do you know that we could get those? And I'm like, what? And I just love these little pouches, because the other thing about them is that while they hold your scissors, you can also tuck in a bunch of other little nifty items that you can take with you in your knitting bag. And Wendy has also pointed out that these are TSA approved, so you can take them on airplanes. Sweet. So yeah, so this is featured in your notions pack, but you will get stitch markers and a needle gauge featuring one of our fabulous studio kitties and some other lovely little goodies. And I will remind everybody to make sure to post their pictures. If you only have this much of your shawl done, good enough, put it on social media so I can find you, and that'll enter you in our halfway through additional prize draw. I should probably reveal that we have a couple of really fabulous prizes for the final draw, and that's going to consist of a sweater quantity of yarn and a set of needles. Yum, 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 yum. So we really went all out on this one because, what can I say? I really enjoy doing this. So there'll be some other small prizes too, but I definitely want to mention that everybody is going to be entered for one of those larger prizes, and you will be able to choose what you get in terms of sweater quantities, and we'll help you choose needles as well. So that brings us to our time. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask before we go? I see Pauline's hand up.
Yes, I've tried to go on Facebook, and because I'm not used to it. And I've tried on Ravelry, where I use Ravelry, but I don't know how to put a picture on.
Okay, well, what we could do is, if you want to email me, and it would be, instead of sales@ancientarts, it's Caroline@ancientarts. Yes. I can put it up for you, and then I can also send you some instructions on how to do it, because I know what you mean. Technology is confusing and weird, and how do you put those things in there? But I don't want you to miss out on being in the draw. So if you just want to send me that, that would be absolutely great.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Did anybody else have a question they want to ask?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the hashtag for Instagram? Because I don't do Facebook, and I very rarely get on Ravelry. So
yeah, I hear you. I'm very much these days an Instagram gal myself, which kind of surprises me, because it's like, well, that used to be the young folk, and I ain't no young folk. Anyway, it is hashtag Roman Villa Shawl.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Caroline, our fourth winner is a lady who uses the pseudonym of Rose iPad. I'm pretty sure that's not her last name. I don't know about the first one.
Thank you. No, yeah, Jane Humphreys.
Oh, hello, Jane.
Well, congratulations, Jane. So glad that you could join us.
Thank you.
So, unless somebody else has a question, we'll probably close up for today. But I do want to remind you that our final extravaganza, whatever you want to call it, KAL session will be 2 weeks from today. And I will give you some tips and tricks as well, including finishing instructions, how to deal with these pesky I-cords. And oh, I just realized that I will talk to you about what to do with this second stripe of this color on the border when you get there, because sometimes people run out of color. And so we'll give you some ideas about substituting. The pattern actually does not list this color because test knitters did run out of it. So it's listed as the red there. But anyway, looking forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. And I'll just pause and see if anybody has a question they'd like to ask. Nope. Okay, that's great. That means that I have answered what you needed. And thank you so much for coming out and joining us. I really enjoyed this, everyone. And thank you so much for participating in this knit along. Oh, you know what, Wendy? I should probably blurb the next one. So if you're like totally obsessed with these knit alongs, we actually just announced today, and I still haven't put it on our social media because I was doing things that made my fingers colored. I'll be putting it up this evening. So we are actually doing one in partnership with Interweave and Chowgu Needles. And it is a really nice shawl designed by Lana Joy. So you can go to Interweave's website and you can join the KAL there. We have kits available for it, and they include the yarn and a lovely needle provided by Chowgu. And I keep saying and here and blanking out, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And Interweave is going all out in terms of the support for that one. So they are doing blog posts, they are doing video techniques, they are going to be doing, here's how you can modify this shawl if you wants to change the shape of it, and all sorts of things like that. And then we will be doing some Zooms for that as well. So if you just go to Interweave's main website, there will actually be the knit along there. And if you click on it, it will take you to the page that tells you all about it. And there's the link there to sign up. The other thing that Interweave is doing is that they are giving you the pattern free. So whether you want to participate in the KAL or not, you can get the pattern for no charge, which is really nice. So definitely want to blurb that now, and we will talk about it a little bit more in the next KAL, because I hate to tell you this, but we're going to do a lot of them this year because we're having way too much fun with them. So once again, thank you, everyone. And I wish you a wonderful evening and happy knitting until we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Fun.
Good night. So Dan, if you'd like to stop recording.